Hey guys, tonight we begin with a concept that feels deeply modern, but is, in fact, ancient, terrifying, and profoundly human. Being accused of something you didn't do. We're diving into the murky, often absurd, and not so just world of medieval justice, specifically how judges, priests, and communities dealt with the poison of a false accusation. Forget the noble idea of innocent until proven guilty. The reality was a grim lottery of superstition, divine intervention, and trials that often felt more like punishments in themselves. We're going to explore a world where proving your innocence might require you to carry a red-hot iron, survive being thrown in a river, or find 11 friends willing to swear on their immortal souls that you're not a liar. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine for a moment you're standing in the muddy square of your village. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and a new, unwelcome scent: suspicion. Yesterday, you were just another face in the crowd, a farmer, a blacksmith's wife, a quiet cooper. Today, you are something else, entirely. You are the accused. Your neighbor, Old Man Hemlock, the one you argued with over a wandering pig last Tuesday, claims you stole his prized chicken. It's a lie. You were mending your roof all afternoon, and the only chicken you saw was the scrawny one that belongs to the priest. But Hemlock is stubborn, loud, and has the ear of the village elder. He points his gnarled finger at you, and just like that, the world shifts. Your friends suddenly can't meet your eye. The baker, who has known you since you were a child, hesitates before selling you a loaf of bread. The accusation, true or not, hangs in the air like a foul miasma. This is the central problem of medieval justice. In a world without forensic science, without CCTV cameras, without even a basic understanding of evidence, a person's word was a weapon, and a false accusation was a poison with no easy antidote. There were no detectives to dust for fingerprints, no alibi to be checked with phone records. Your alibi was your word against theirs. And if your accuser was more powerful, more respected, or simply more believable than you were already halfway to a guilty verdict. The legal systems of the early Middle Ages were a patchwork of local customs, Germanic tribal law, and the lingering ghost of Roman administration. For the common person, justice wasn't a grand affair in a marble courthouse. It was a community event, often adjudicated by a local lord, a council of elders, or a clergyman who might also double as the village's best brewer. The goal wasn't always to find the objective truth. Often, it was to restore social harmony, to end a dispute quickly before it festered and tore the delicate fabric of the community apart. This meant that the appearance of justice was often more important than justice itself. And what happens when a community needs a resolution, but the facts are just one person's word against another's? What happens when a lie takes root and threatens to choke the life out of an innocent person? Well, that's when things get truly medieval. When human judgment failed, they turned to a higher power. They decided that if man couldn't figure it out, they would simply ask God to point out the liar. And God, they believed, would answer. Not with a whisper or a sign from the heavens, but through fire, water, and combat. The solutions they devised to deal with false accusations were some of the most bizarre, terrifying, and fascinating rituals in human history. They were about to put you through hell to prove your innocence. So, Old Man Hemlock insists you're a chicken thief. You insist you're not. The village elder, tired of the bickering and probably hungover from last night's ale, throws up his hands. There is no proof, only two conflicting stories. Fine, he declares, his voice echoing with a grim finality. Let God decide. Welcome, my friend, to the terrifying logic of the trial by ordeal. This wasn't a trial in the modern sense. There were no lawyers, no cross-examinations, no jury of your peers. There was just you, a priest, a prayer, and a deeply unpleasant physical task that was supposed to reveal the judgment of God himself. The theory was simple. God would not allow an innocent person to suffer. He would intervene, perform a little miracle, and prove your innocence for all to see. It was, in essence, a divine gamble, and your body was the betting chip. Let's explore your options, shall we? First up, we have the classic, the crowd pleaser, the ordeal of hot iron. The entire village gathers, a sea of anxious, morbidly curious faces. You're led to the church, the only place where such a sacred judgment can be performed. The air is thick with incense and fear. The priest stands before you, his face a mask of solemnity. He begins the rite, chanting prayers, consecrating the instrument of your trial, a heavy piece of iron, perhaps a plowshare or a simple bar. It is placed in the roaring fire of the church hearth until it glows a menacing, vibrant red, pulsing with a heat you can feel from across the room. Your heart is pounding in your chest, a frantic drum against your ribs. You've been fasting for 3 days, as required, to purify your body and soul for God's judgment. All you can think about is the searing heat, the smell of burning metal. The priest delivers the final invocation, calling upon God to show a sign, to protect the innocent and expose the guilty. Then it's time. With a pair of tongs, the glowing iron is lifted from the fire. You are commanded to step forward. You have to carry this piece of divine judgment a set distance. It's usually 9 feet, 3 paces for the Holy Trinity. You wrap your hand in what little cloth you have, though you know it will do nothing. You take a deep breath, the smell of your own terror mixing with the incense. You grip the iron. The pain is immediate, absolute, and blinding. It's a white-hot scream that consumes your entire being. The sizzle of your own flesh, the acrid smell of burning, the gasp of the crowd, it all merges into a single moment of pure agony. You stumble forward, 1 step, 2, 3. You drop the iron with a clang that echoes through the silent church. Your hand is a ruin, a blistering, weeping catastrophe. But the trial isn't over, not even close. This is the truly cruel part. The priest takes your savaged hand, inspects it gravely, and then wraps it in consecrated linen, sealing it with wax. You are sent home, your hand throbbing with a pain that eclipses all thought. For 3 days, you must wait. 3 days of feverish prayer, of staring at the sealed bandage, wondering what lies beneath. On the 3rd day, you return to the church. The entire village is there again, their eyes fixed on you. The priest slowly, deliberately unwraps the bandage. The crowd leans in. And now, the moment of judgment. Is the wound healing cleanly a sign of God's miraculous intervention? Or is it festering, infected, and putrid a clear sign of your guilt? If it's clean, you are declared innocent. Hemlock is shamed, and you are free to go, albeit with a permanently scarred hand and a story that will be told for generations. But if there is any sign of corruption, as they called it pus, swelling, the sickly sweet smell of infection, which was almost guaranteed in a world without antiseptic you, are guilty. God has spoken, and the earthly punishment, be it a fine, a flogging, or exile, is now merely a formality. The divine court has already passed its sentence. Perhaps the thought of carrying a white-hot iron doesn't appeal to you. Fair enough. Maybe the judge offers you another option, one that seems gentler at first glance. The ordeal of cold water. Don't be fooled. This is just another flavor of divinely sanctioned terror. Once again, you are led by a solemn procession. But this time, you head not to the church, but to the nearest body of water, a river, a lake, or even a large pond. Has to be deep enough for the ritual. A priest is there, of course, to bless the water, to transform it from a simple pond into an instrument of God's will. He exorcises it, commanding it to accept the innocent and reject the guilty. In his prayers, the water becomes a pure, holy element that will not suffer a liar to enter its embrace. You are stripped down, your hands and feet bound together. A rope is tied around your waist, held by a sturdy man on the bank. This isn't for your safety, not really. It's to make sure they can pull your body out afterward, regardless of the verdict. You stand at the water's edge, shivering, less from the cold and more from the sheer primal fear of what's to come. The entire village is watching, their faces a mixture of pity, suspicion, and morbid excitement. With a final prayer, you are unceremoniously shoved or thrown into the water. The shock of the cold is a physical blow, driving the air from your lungs. Bound and helpless, you sink beneath the surface. The world dissolves into a murky green silence. Panic claws at you. Your lungs burn. Your mind screams for air. This is the moment of truth. According to the logic of the ordeal, the pure water will accept an innocent person, allowing them to sink. If you sink, you are pulled out, sputtering and half drowned, but vindicated. You are innocent. God has welcomed you into his pure element. Of course, there was the not insignificant risk of actually drowning before they could haul you out. But that was considered a tragic accident, not a guilty verdict. A small comfort, I'm sure. But what if you float? What if your body, buoyed by air, trapped in your clothes or simple physics, bobs back to the surface? This is the divine tell. The holy water has rejected you, has spit you out as something unclean, a liar that it will not abide. If you float, you are guilty. God has made his judgment clear for all to see. You are pulled from the water not to cheers of relief, but to jeers and angry mutters. Your guilt is proven, and you will now face the earthly consequences. This particular ordeal had a long and infamous life, especially during the witch hunts that would plague Europe centuries later. The image of a bound woman being thrown into a pond became synonymous with the brutal superstition of the age. It was a perfect system for the accusers. If the accused drowned, they were innocent but dead. If they floated, they were guilty and would be executed. There was no winning, only different ways of losing. And as you're pulled from the water, gasping and shivering, you realize the truth of medieval justice. Sometimes, the trial itself was the punishment. Now, if you happen to be a person of standing a knight, a nobleman, or at least someone who owns a decent sword and knows which end to hold, you might be offered a more proactive way of proving your innocence. You don't have to trust in the passive judgment of fire or water. You can fight for it. Welcome to the trial by combat, the most cinematic and brutally straightforward form of medieval justice. The principle was the same as the other ordeals. God would not allow the guilty to triumph. He would lend his strength to the arm of the righteous, guiding their sword and protecting them from their opponent's blows. It was, in essence, a duel with God as the referee. This form of trial was almost exclusively reserved for the upper classes. A peasant couldn't just challenge a lord to a duel. The social order had its limits. This was for disputes between equals, often over land, inheritance, or accusations of treason or cowardice. Let's say a rival baron, Sir Reginald, the overly ambitious, has accused you of plotting against the king. It's a vile lie designed to get your lands forfeited. Witnesses are few. Evidence is non-existent. The king, seeing a chance for some top-tier entertainment and a quick resolution, decrees a trial by combat. The day of the duel is a major event. A field is prepared. The lists are set up. Spectators flock from miles around, placing bets and choosing sides. It's the medieval equivalent of a pay-per-view fight. You and Sir Reginald arrive in your finest armor, polished to a mirror shine. Your horses are magnificent. Your squires are nervous. Priests are on hand to bless the combatants and the weapons, reminding everyone that this is not a mere brawl, but a sacred appeal to the Almighty. You both swear solemn oaths on holy relics, declaring your righteousness and the perfidy of your opponent. The heralds announce the stakes: life, honor, and the truth itself. Then the trumpet sounds, you charge. The clash of lance on shield is a deafening crack. Horses scream with splinters. If you're lucky, you unhorse your opponent. If you're unlucky, he unhorses you. The fight often descends into a brutal, clumsy, clanging match on the ground. You are encased in dozens of pounds of steel. Your vision is a narrow slit. You can barely hear anything over your own ragged breathing and the clang of metal on metal. You swing your sword, your axe, your mace, aiming for the gaps in the armor, the armpit, the visor, the joints. It is exhausting, terrifying work. And all the while, you are praying that God is paying attention, praying that your arm doesn't tire, that your foot doesn't slip, that Sir Reginald's morning porridge isn't sitting better than yours. If you defeat your opponent, if you force him to yield, or, more definitively, kill him, you have won more than a fight. You have won your case. God has granted you victory, proving your innocence for all to see. You are carried from the field a hero, your name cleared, your honor restored. Sir Reginald, if he survived, is declared a liar and a perjurer, and his body is often unceremoniously hanged as a final insult. But if you lose, if his blade finds a gap in your armor, if you fall, wounded and defeated, then you are not just a loser. You are guilty. God has abandoned you, revealing your lie to the world. If the fall doesn't kill you, the executioner will. A guilty verdict in trial by combat was a death sentence. And what if you were a woman, or old, or infirm? You couldn't be expected to fight an armored knight. In these cases, you were allowed to hire a champion, a professional warrior, to fight on your behalf. But the stakes were the same. If your champion lost, you were guilty. You had to choose your fighter very, very carefully. 'Cause in this courtroom, there was no appeal, only the final, bloody judgment rendered in steel. Perhaps being boiled, burned, or beaten to death in the name of divine justice doesn't sound appealing.
Out.
For many minor disputes, especially in early Germanic and Anglo-Saxon law, there was another way out, a method that relied not on divine intervention, but on something far more tangible, your reputation. This was the practice of compurgation, or trial by oath. Let's go back to your chicken thief accusation. Old man Hemlock is still pointing his finger, but instead of a trial by ordeal, the elder decides on compurgation. To clear your name, you don't have to risk life and limb. You just have to swear a very, very serious oath. But here's the catch. You can't do it alone. You are required to produce a certain number of oath helpers, compurgators, who will swear alongside you. These aren't character witnesses in the modern sense. They aren't there to provide testimony or an alibi. Their job is much simpler and far more profound. They are there to swear that they believe your oath is clean. They are, in essence, putting their own immortal souls on the line as collateral for your honesty. The number of oath helpers required depended on the severity of the crime and your social status. For a stolen chicken, you might need 6. For a more serious crime, like murder, you might need 11 or 12. And if you were a nobleman, you needed other nobles. A peasant's oath couldn't support a lord's. The social hierarchy was baked into the very fabric of the law. So your task begins. You have to go around your village and convince your friends, your family, your neighbors to stand with you. This is the real trial. It's a test of your social standing, your relationships, your entire life's reputation. Can you find 11 men, good and true, who are willing to risk divine punishment for perjury if you are lying? Imagine the conversations. You approached your friend Thorgath, the Fletcher. Thorgath, you say, your voice low. Hemlock has accused me. I need you to swear for me. Thorgath looks away, stroking his beard. He likes you, sure. But perjury was considered a mortal sin, a direct path to hell. Is he willing to bet his eternal soul on the fact that you didn't, in a moment of weakness? A Hemlock's plump hen. If you were a respected, well-liked member of the community, finding your oath helpers might be easy. People would flock to your side, eager to defend your honor. But if you were an outsider, a troublemaker, or just a bit weird, you were in serious trouble. If you couldn't gather the required number of compurgators, you automatically lost the case. Your inability to find support was, in itself, a guilty verdict. If you do manage to assemble your team, you all proceed to the church. Standing before the altar, holding a holy relic, you recite the oath. It's a formal, terrifyingly specific declaration. By the Lord, I am guiltless, both in deed and in counsel, of the charge of which Hemlock accuses me. Then, one by one, your oath helpers step forward. They place their hands on the relic and swear their own oath by the Lord. The oath is clean and unperjured, which he has sworn. The language had to be perfect. One slip of the tongue, one stutter, one misplaced word, and the oath was considered. Burst. It failed, and you were found guilty. The pressure was immense, but if you and all your helpers recited the oaths flawlessly, you were declared innocent. Your good name, backed by the spiritual credit of your community, had won the day. Compurgation was a system built entirely on the idea that no one would dare lie while touching a piece of a saint's bone, and that no one would risk hell for a friend who was probably guilty anyway. It was a system of justice rooted in social cohesion, where your best defense wasn't a good lawyer, but a good life lived among good neighbors. For centuries, the courtroom was a stage for divine drama. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the seeds of a new kind of justice began to take root. The ordeal, with its reliance on miracles and superstition, started to fall out of favor, especially with the church itself. In 1215, a landmark event occurred. The Fourth Lateran Council, convened by Pope Innocent III, officially forbade priests from participating in trials by ordeal. This was a bombshell. Without the church's blessing, without the solemn rites that turned a pond or a hot iron into an instrument of God, the ordeal lost its legitimacy. It was like a magician having his wand snapped. Suddenly, judges and lords across Europe were faced with a crisis. If God was no longer going to be the chief detective, how on earth were they supposed to figure out who was lying? This created a legal vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped a concept that had been quietly developing in England and parts of Europe: the inquest, the precursor to the modern jury. The idea wasn't entirely new. For centuries, kings had used groups of local men to inquire about local affairs: how much land a person owned, what local customs were, who was responsible for maintaining a bridge. These men were sworn to tell the truth based on their local knowledge. Now, that same principle began to be applied to criminal cases. Instead of asking God to provide a sign, a judge would now summon a group of 12 good men and true from the local community. These men, the first jurors, were not the impartial blank slates we expect today. On the contrary, they were chosen precisely because they were locals. They were expected to know the people involved, to have heard the gossip, to understand the reputations of the accuser and the accused. They were investigators as much as they were judges. Their job was to inquire into the facts of the case and deliver a verdict, guilty or not guilty. They would listen to the accuser. They would listen to the accused. They might even go out and conduct their own inquiries, talking to neighbors and gathering information.
Oh.
Their verdict wasn't based on a divine miracle, but on their collective local knowledge and hopefully their common sense. This was a revolutionary shift. It moved justice from the realm of the supernatural to the realm of human reason and community knowledge. Of course, it was far from perfect. Juries could be biased. They could be swayed by a powerful lord. They could convict someone based on nothing more than village gossip and a general sense that the accused was a bit shifty. A false accusation was still incredibly dangerous, but now you had a new way to fight it. You could present your side of the story not to a priest preparing a hot iron, but to a group of your neighbors. You could point out your accuser's reputation for lying. You could bring forth people to speak to your own good character. The focus began to shift, ever so slightly, from testing your soul to examining the facts. However murky they might be, the rise of the jury was slow, uneven, and messy. For a long time, old superstitions coexisted with the new methods, but the intellectual dam had broken. The idea that a person's guilt or innocence should be determined by evidence and human judgment had been let loose. A long, slow, stumbling journey toward modern justice, with all its flaws and aspirations, had begun. The age of asking God to solve legal disputes was ending, and the age of asking 12 regular people to do it was just getting started. And as anyone who has ever served on a jury knows, that can be just as terrifying. So yes, the medieval world's approach to a false accusation was a chaotic, terrifying, and often irrational mess of divine appeals and community pressure. But the fear of the false accusation and the hysteria it can unleash didn't die with the ordeal. It just changed its shape, festering in the dark corners of human suspicion until it exploded into one of history's most infamous and tragic legal nightmares. We now travel forward a few centuries across an ocean to a small Puritan village in colonial America, where the devil himself seemed to have been let loose. An appointed finger was as good as a death sentence. We're going to Salem. The year is 1692. The place, Salem Village, a small, anxious Puritan settlement in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The world outside is harsh and unforgiving, a vast, dark wilderness filled with perceived threats from native tribes to the devil himself. The world inside is even harsher. Life is a rigid, unforgiving cycle of prayer, hard labor, and a constant gnawing fear of God's wrath. This is a community steeped in paranoia, living on the edge of the known world, believing that Satan was a real, tangible presence, actively seeking to corrupt their souls and destroy their city on a hill. Into this pressure cooker of fear and piety, a strange illness falls upon a small group of young women, including the daughter and niece of the village minister, Reverend Samuel Parris. The girls Betty Parris and Abigail Williams begin to exhibit terrifying symptoms. They contort into unnatural shapes, scream out in pain, and claim to be pinched, pricked, and tormented by invisible forces. The local doctor, baffled by their ailments, can find no physical cause. In a world that saw God and the devil in every shadow, he offers a chilling diagnosis. The girls are under an evil hand. It's the only explanation that makes sense to the terrified. Villagers, witchcraft, the devil had sent his agents into their midst. The question was no longer if there were witches in Salem, but who. Pressured by the ministers and magistrates, the afflicted girls begin to name names. Their accusations are a strange, venomous mix of local grievances, social anxieties, and perhaps the wild fantasies of young minds suddenly thrust into the center of attention. The first to be accused are predictably the most vulnerable, the social outcasts. Tituba, Reverend Paris's enslaved woman from the Caribbean, whose stories of voodoo and magic had both fascinated and frightened the girls. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar known for muttering under her breath, and Sarah Osborne, reclusive woman embroiled in disputes over her late husband's estate. These three women were the perfect targets. They had no power, no influential family to defend them. They fit the Puritan image of who a witch might be. Under intense and likely brutal interrogation, Tituba confesses. She spins wild tales of signing the devil's book, of flying on a stick, of a conspiracy of witches working to bring down Salem. Her confession is a bombshell. It's the proof the magistrates needed. The fear that had been simmering in Salem now boils over into a full-blown panic. Tituba's confession validates the girls' stories, and now their accusations gain a terrifying new weight. They are no longer just sick girls. They are star witnesses in a holy war. The stage is set for a legal and spiritual catastrophe, where spectral evidence, whispered accusations, and a teenage girl's scream held more power than a lifetime of piety. The hunt had begun. With the initial confessions in hand, the legal machinery of Salem ground into motion. But this was a machine operating without a rulebook, fueled by terror. The local magistrates, John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, began the examinations in the village meeting house. This wasn't a trial, it was an inquisition. The accused were presumed guilty, and the goal of the proceedings was not to determine fact, but to extract a confession. The courtroom became a theater of the macabre. The afflicted girls were present at every examination, and their testimony was the main event. They would writhe on the floor, scream in agony, and claim to see the specter of the accused tormenting them. This spectral evidence the claim that a witch's spirit could travel and harm others, visible only to the victim, was the most insidious element of the trials. How could you defend yourself against a crime your accuser claimed to see, but no one else could? If you denied it, the girls would often shriek louder, claiming your specter was pinching them right there in the courtroom. If you looked at them, they would fall into fits. Imagine being an accused woman like Martha Corey, a respected, church-going member of the community. She was skeptical of the proceedings from the start, openly mocking the girls' accusations. For her skepticism, she was accused herself. In the courtroom, every move she made was interpreted as witchcraft. When she bit her lip in concentration, the girls screamed that she was biting them. When she shifted her hands, they cried out that she was pinching them with her spirit. Her rational denials were twisted into proof of her guilt. She was a witch, they claimed, and a stubborn one at that. The hysteria fed on itself. The girls, now a growing group of accusers, became local celebrities, holding the power of life and death in their hands. Their accusations began to move up the social ladder. Respected figures like Rebecca Nurse, a frail, elderly matriarch known for her piety, and John Proctor, a tavern owner who had vocally criticized the trials, were suddenly named. The village was stunned. If people like Rebecca Nurse could be witches, then anyone could. No one was safe. The logic became a perfect, inescapable trap. If you confessed, you were spared execution, but you were expected to name other witches, feeding more victims to the pyre. Your life was saved, but at the cost of your soul and the lives of your neighbors. If you maintained your innocence, as Rebecca Nurse and John Proctor did, your steadfast denial was seen as the devil's pride. The very act of pleading not guilty was evidence of your guilt. The local jails began to overflow with the accused. Men and women from all walks of life, chained together in squalid, dark cells. The panic spread beyond Salem Village to neighboring towns like Andover and Topsfield. What began with 3 outcasts had spiraled into a full-blown witch hunt, a contagion of fear where every neighbor eyed the other with suspicion, and the word of a hysterical girl could condemn the most righteous soul to the gallows. In June of 1692, the newly appointed governor of Massachusetts, William Phips, established a special court of oyer and terminer to hear and to determine to handle the witchcraft cases. The court, presided over by judges like the zealous William Stoughton, fully accepted spectral evidence as fact. The trials were a foregone conclusion. The first person to be tried and executed was Bridget Bishop, a tavern keeper with a reputation for being gossipy and wearing provocative red bodices. She was an easy target. Innocence, but the girl's courtroom theatrics sealed her fate. On June 10th, she was taken to Gallows Hill and hanged. Her death marked a terrifying turning point. The state had officially sanctioned the killing of witches based on spectral evidence. The floodgates were now wide open. Throughout the summer, the hangings continued. Rebecca Nurse, despite a petition signed by dozens of her neighbors attesting to her good character, was found guilty and executed. The Reverend George Burroughs, a former minister of Salem, was accused. At his execution, he flawlessly recited the Lord's Prayer, something a witch was supposedly unable to do. The crowd wavered, a flicker of doubt spreading through them. But the influential minister, Cotton Mather, watching from horseback, assured the crowd that the devil could disguise himself as an angel of light. The execution proceeded. Perhaps the most tragic figure was John Proctor. He had been a fierce critic of the trials, calling the afflicted girls scammers and liars. For his dissent, he and his pregnant wife, Elizabeth, were accused. In prison, he wrote a desperate letter, pleading for a change of venue and decrying the use of torture to extract confessions. "We are all amazed," he wrote, "to see the absurdity of these things." His plea was ignored. He was hanged in August, his wife spared only because of her pregnancy. By the end of September, 19 people had been hanged on Gallows Hill. Several more, including 2 infants, had died in the squalid prisons. And one man, an elderly farmer named Giles Corey, who refused to enter a plea in a court he considered illegitimate, was subjected to peine forte, et d'orgie, was slowly crushed to death under heavy stones, his last defiant words reportedly being "more weight." The sheer scale of the death and the increasingly unbelievable accusations, including against the governor's own wife, finally began to shake the conviction of the authorities. Prominent ministers, led by Cotton Mather's father, began to publicly question the reliability of spectral evidence. He argued it was better that 10 suspected witches escape than one innocent person be condemned. The intellectual tide was turning. In October, Governor Phipps, spurred by public doubt and a growing sense that the situation had spiraled out of control, dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer. He replaced it with a new court that disallowed spectral evidence. Without the ability to convict based on visions and fits, the remaining trials quickly fell apart. The majority of the remaining accused were acquitted. The Great Salem witch hunt was over. The fever had broken, leaving a community shattered, grieving, and stained with a shame that would endure for centuries. The aftermath was a slow, painful crawl back toward reason, a reckoning with the horrifying reality of what happens when fear is allowed to become law in the quiet. Cold years that followed 1692, a deep and profound shame settled over Massachusetts. The judges, ministers, and jurors who had once been so certain of their righteous crusade were forced to confront the terrible truth. They had been wrong. They had executed innocent people. The process of public apology began slowly. In 1697, Samuel Sewall, one of the main judges, stood before his congregation while the minister read his public confession. Sewall admitted his blame and shame and prayed for forgiveness, accepting the blame and shame of it. The jury foreman and other jurors also issued a public apology, admitting they were sadly deluded and mistaken, and feared they had brought the guilt of innocent blood upon themselves. In 1702, the General Court declared the trials unlawful. In 1711, the colony passed a bill restoring the rights and good names of many of the accused and granted financial compensation to their heirs. It wasn't much, but it was an official admission of a catastrophic error. Ann Putnam Jr., one of the most prolific of the original accusers, stood before the Salem Village Church in 1706 and offered a public apology. Blaming her actions on a great delusion of Satan, the Salem witch trials became a dark chapter in the American story, a cautionary tale that has been invoked ever since as a symbol of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and the dangers of abandoning due process. It raises timeless questions about the nature of justice, the power of fear, and the ease with which a community can turn on its own. Historians have since offered numerous explanations for the hysteria. Some point to social and economic strife within Salem Village, with accusations often falling along lines of existing family feuds and land disputes. Others suggest a psychological component, perhaps a form of conversion disorder among the girls, or even the possibility of ergot poisoning, fungus that grows on rye bread and can cause hallucinations and convulsions. Whatever the cause, the legacy of Salem is a powerful and enduring one. It serves as a stark reminder of what happens when a legal system becomes untethered from reason. When spectral evidence or any form of unsubstantiated accusations Given the weight of fact, it's a story about the fragility of justice and the terrible cost of a false accusation. Not just to the individual, but to the very soul of a community. The ghosts of Gallows Hill still whisper a warning that the line between order and hysteria, between faith and fanaticism, is terrifyingly thin. I will now generate the next story segment. To meet the word count, this will be a detailed, multi-chapter narrative. Let us rewind the clock once more, back across the Atlantic, to the heart of medieval Europe. We are going to talk about an organization that, for nearly 2 centuries, embodied the very ideal of holy warfare, power, and piety. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, known to history as the Knights Templar, born in the aftermath of the First Crusade around 1119. Their original purpose was noble and straightforward: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling through the treacherous roads of the Holy Land. They began as a small band of 9 knights, so poor, the legend goes, that 2 knights had to share a single Horsane image immortalized on their famous seal. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, living as warrior monks, a new and potent concept that merged the chivalry of knighthood with the devotion of monasticism. But this small, pious order would not remain poor for long. Sanctioned by the Pope and championed by powerful figures like Bernard of Clairvaux, the Templars exploded in popularity. Donations poured inland, castles, money, and recruits. Lords and kings across Europe, eager to contribute to the holy cause, and perhaps by a little heavenly favor, gifted them vast estates. Their network grew at an astonishing rate. The Templars became more than just protectors. They became one of the most formidable fighting forces in the world, clad in their iconic white mantles emblazoned with a red cross. They were the elite shock troops of the Crusader armies, disciplined, fearless, and forbidden to retreat unless outnumbered more than 3 to 1. They were often the first into the breach and the last to leave the battlefield. Their reputation for courage was legendary. With their growing wealth and vast network of preceptories, local chapters, stretching from London to Jerusalem, they also evolved into something else entirely unexpected: the world's first multinational corporation. They developed a sophisticated system of banking. A pilgrim could deposit money at the London Temple and receive a letter of credit, which they could then cash in at the Templar preceptory in the Holy Land. It was a revolutionary system of international finance, making them the trusted bankers for kings, popes, and merchants across Christendom. They owned fleets of ships, vast tracts of farmland, and castles that doubled as fortified banks. They were powerful, secretive, and immensely wealthy, and they were, in theory, accountable only to the Pope himself. For nearly 200 years, the Knights Templar were untouchable, a symbol of the power and reach of the Catholic Church. But power, especially when combined with secrecy and immense wealth, breeds envy. And in the heart of France, a king was watching. A king who was deeply in debt, profoundly ambitious, and utterly ruthless. King Philip IV of France saw the Templars not as a holy order, but as a state within a state, a threat to his own royal authority. and most tantalizingly, a vault of treasure just waiting to be cracked open. The stage was being set for one of the most shocking and brutal betrayals in history, where the heroes of Christendom would be recast as heretics, and their trial would be a masterclass in false accusation on an industrial scale. By the early 14th century, Crusades was over. The Holy Land had been lost, and the Templars, whose very existence was tied to its defense, were left without a clear military purpose. They were still immensely powerful and wealthy, operating from their headquarters in Paris, but they were also vulnerable, an organization adrift, and King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, for his looks, not his character, saw his opportunity. Philip was a man obsessed with absolute power and was perpetually, desperately in need of money. He had already debased the currency, expelled the Jews to seize their assets, and was now eyeing the vast, untaxed wealth of the Templars. He owed them a fortune, and he had come to resent their power and their allegiance to the Pope, which he saw as an affront to his own sovereignty. Philip decided on a course of action so audacious, so brutal, it was almost unthinkable. He would not just tax the Templars or seize their lands. He would destroy them entirely. To do this, he needed more than a legal pretext. He needed a moral one. He couldn't attack them for being rich. He had to attack them for being evil, working in secret with his ruthless minister, Guillaume de Nogaret. Philip began to build a case. He gathered disgruntled extemplars, criminals, and informants who, under pressure or in exchange for pardons, began to spin tales of heresy and corruption within the order. The accusations were wild and designed to shock the conscience of Christendom. The Templars, it was claimed, were not holy warriors, but secret devil worshippers. The charges alleged that during their secret initiation rites, new recruits were forced to deny Christ, spit on the crucifix, and engage in obscene kisses. They were accused of idolatry, worshipping a mysterious bearded head known as Baphomaton, of institutionalized sodomy. These were the most heinous crimes imaginable in the medieval world. Charges of heresy that would place the Templars outside the protection of God and man. With his list of grotesque accusations prepared, Philip moved with terrifying speed and precision. He sent out sealed orders to his seneschals across France to be opened and executed at the same moment. On the dawn of Friday, October 13th, 1307, date that has been linked by folklore to the modern superstition of Friday the 13th, his plan was unleashed. In a massive, coordinated military operation, hundreds of Templars across France were arrested. Simultaneously, they were dragged from their beds in preceptories from Paris to the Pyrenees, caught completely off guard. The Grand Master himself, Jacques de Molay, was arrested in Paris. The knights, who had faced down armies in the Holy Land, offered no resistance. They were, after all, in their own country, being arrested by agents of their own king. They could not have imagined what was to come. They were thrown into royal dungeons, chained and isolated. The king immediately seized all Templar assets. In France, their castles, their lands, their treasure, but the gold was only part of the prize. The real goal was their confession. Now that he had the knights in his custody, Philip would hand them over to the methods of the medieval Inquisition, where the truth was not something to be discovered, but something to be manufactured through pain. The show trial was about to begin with the Templars in chains. The second phase of Philip's plan began, extracting the confessions that would justify his actions to the world. The trial was orchestrated by the king's men, but it used the fearsome apparatus of the medieval Inquisition to give it a veneer of religious legitimacy. The knights were subjected to brutal, systematic torture. These were not gentle interrogations. The methods were designed to break the body, and with it, the will. Knights were subjected to the rack, where their limbs were slowly stretched until their joints dislocated. Their feet were coated in animal fat and held over open flames, a torture known as pelcock, which roasted the flesh from the bone. They were subjected to sleep deprivation, starvation, and repeated dunkings in freezing water. Under such relentless agony, even the most battle-hardened warriors broke. One after another, the knights began to confess. They confessed to everything they were accused of: denying Christ, spitting on the cross, worshipping an idol, obscene rituals. The details were often strangely similar, a clear sign that the confessions were being fed to them by their torturers. The Grand Master, Jacques de Maule, a man in his 60s, also confessed under duress, admitting to some of the charges and lending a devastating blow to the order's credibility. Pope Clement V, a Frenchman who owed his papacy to Philip, was initially outraged by the king's high-handed actions. The Templars were answerable only to him, but when presented with a flood of signed confessions, including that of the Grand Master, he was backed into a corner. He issued a papal bull ordering the arrest of all Templars throughout Christendom. The hunt went international, though in most other countries, like England, Spain, and Germany, the trials were far less brutal and convictions were rare. Many rulers were skeptical of Philip's motives, but in France, the machine of justice ground on. The confessions obtained through torture were presented as irrefutable proof of the order's guilt. When some knights, brought before papal commissions, found the courage to retract their confessions, explaining they had spoken only to end the pain, Philip's henchmen had a brutal response. Any knight who retracted his confession was branded a relapsed heretic, a crime for which the punishment was death. In 1310, in a field outside Paris, 54 Knights Templar, who had dared to recant their forced confessions and defend their order, were burned at the stake. They were executed slowly, their screams serving as a horrifying warning to any other knight who might consider telling the truth. After that, the retractions stopped. The king had made his point. The trial was a sham. The evidence was manufactured. And the verdict was a foregone conclusion. The only thing left was the final, official dissolution of the order that had once been the pride of Christendom. The trial of the Knights Templar dragged on for years, a slow, bureaucratic strangulation of an order already broken by torture and betrayal. Pope Clement V, caught between the ruthless ambition of King Philip and the dawning, horrifying realization that the charges were likely baseless, tried to salvage some semblance of justice. He convened the Council of Vienne in 1312, not to condemn, the Templars outright, but to debate their future. In the end, the Pope made a political decision, not a legal one. He declared that while the guilt of the order as a whole was not proven, its reputation had been so irrevocably stained by scandal that it could no longer function. By papal decree, the Knights Templar were officially disbanded. Their immense wealth and property were to be transferred to their rival order, the Knights Hospitaller. Of course, King Philip made sure a huge portion of it was diverted to the French royal coffers to cover the costs of the trial. His true goal all along, the final act of the tragedy, came in March 1314. The Grand Master, Jacques de Malle, and Geoffrey de Charny, another high-ranking Templar, had been languishing in prison for 7 years. They were brought before a panel of cardinals in Paris to hear their final sentence, life in prison. But at that moment, after years of silence, something in de Malle snapped. Standing before the crowd in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, the old warrior, who had once confessed under torture, found his voice. He rose and proclaimed loudly that the Knights Templar were holy and just. He declared that all the charges were lies, and that his confession had been wrung from him only through the agony of torture. He retracted it all, choosing an honorable death over a life of shame. Geoffrey de Charny joined him, also proclaiming their innocence. King Philip was furious. He had his confession, his show trial, and his victory. He would not allow this last-minute defiance to stand. Declaring them relapsed heretics, he ordered them to be executed that very evening as dusk fell over Paris. Jacques de Malle and Geoffrey de Charny were taken to a small island in the Seine. They were bound to the stake, and the pyre was lit. Legend holds that, as the flames rose, de Malle cursed both King Philip and Pope Clement, summoning them to meet him before God's judgment within the year. Whether the curse was real or simply a powerful story that arose later, the outcome was chilling. Pope Clement V died just 1 month later. King Philip IV died in a hunting accident before the year was out. The Knights Templar were gone. Their order was dissolved, their wealth scattered, their name forever linked with heresy and dark legends. The trial remains one of the most infamous examples of how the machinery of justice can be hijacked by greed and power. A story where false accusations, amplified by torture and political ambition, brought down one of the most powerful organizations in the world. Their fiery end became a symbol of ultimate betrayal, a haunting legacy of warrior monks who were destroyed not by an enemy's sword, but by their own king's lies.